Today we're going to be talking about congruence and triangles. We will be able to identify congruent figures and corresponding parts. So, are the following figures congruent? What we need to know is that congruent figures have the same size and the same shape. What this means is that each corresponding part, so pairs of angles or pairs of sides that have the same general position in the figures, must be equal. If they are, then we can describe them with a congruence statement. So if we look at the triangle on the left, let's start with angle A just because it's the first letter of the alphabet. Angle A is 41 degrees. Angle N is also 41 degrees. Therefore, those are corresponding parts, and we know that angle A is congruent to angle N. Angle B is 58 degrees. Well, so is angle T. So angle B is congruent to angle T. Then angle C is 81 degrees, and so is angle O. Therefore, angle C is congruent to angle O. We can do the same things with the sides. Side AB, we'll start there. That's the longest side with a side of length of 12. And NT is also 12. Our next longest side is side AC. Which would be congruent to side ON. And then finally our smallest side, BC, would be congruent to OT. Now, it's very important when we write our triangle congruence statement that we follow the same order based on side lengths or angles. I like using angles because it's easier. So triangle, and it doesn't really matter what order you write the first triangle in as long as you follow the same pattern for the second. So what I'm going to do is go from the smallest angle to the medium angle to the largest angle. So A, B, C is congruent to triangle. Now I'm going to follow the letters that matched up with A and B and C. A and N were congruent, so I'm going to start with N. B and T were congruent, so T is going to come second. And C and O were congruent, so O will come last. So triangle ABC is congruent to angle NTO. Are these triangles congruent? Now if you notice, all the angles are the same, which is great. And the sides are the same in this triangle. In this triangle, they're all the same. But this side is not congruent to any of those sides because this has one tick mark and those have two. So these are not congruent. The markings would have to match. Given the following figures, what is the value of x? So let's look at this statement. X is on FG. So we want to look at F and G. F and G line up with A and B. So we want to look at A and B to see which side matches up with. Since they're congruent, we know that the expressions will be equal. So x plus 1 would have to equal 5. Therefore, x equals 4. In this example, we're only given two angles of the triangle. But in order to solve this, we need to know that if two pairs of angles are congruent, then the third pair will also be congruent. So if A is congruent to N and C is congruent to O, then B would have to be congruent to T. But we don't know what B is. But remember, we know that all the angles in a triangle add up to 180. And that leaves us with 40 degrees. So X has to equal 40 degrees. Some other rules that can help us out: the reflexive, symmetric, and transitive properties. So in reflexive, if this is triangle A, B, C, and the segment is D, then we know if we have this blue triangle and this pink triangle, that segment BD from the blue triangle would be congruent to segment BD from the pink triangle. If they share the side, they're congruent, they're the same. Here, if we look at triangle A, B, C, we have this shared side again, and we have triangle A, C, D. We would know that AC is congruent to CA. Even if we go opposite directions around the triangles, the side that's shared is still going to be the same. Here, if AB is congruent to CD, and we know that because they have the same tick marks, but we also know that CD is equal to 5 millimeters, we can cut out the middleman and say that AB must also equal 5 millimeters. So our last example. Use properties or theorems to mark the picture with any extra information possible about what might be congruent. Then write a congruence statement if possible. So we already know that JY matches up with NY. We know that JH is congruent to BN and BY is congruent to HY based on the tick marks that are on the sides. But right now we don't know anything about the angles. But we learned some angle rules in previous units that can help us out. We know that these angles here have to be congruent because they're vertical angles. Don't know if you remember, but these little triangles on the sides are telling us that these are parallel. Well, angle J and angle N would then be alternate interiors of these parallel lines, and it might be easier if you see it if we extend those sides. There's one parallel line, there's the other, and then there's our transversal. Then earlier we said if two pairs of angles are congruent, we automatically know that the third pair is also congruent. So let's write our congruent statement. Whatever order you want to use for the first triangle is fine. I just went from 1 arc mark to 2 arc marks to 3 arc marks. So YJH would have to be congruent to triangle YNB. Remember, the order that we write our congruent statements in is very, very, very important. Write your summary, and I'll see you